Once upon a time, as Little Red Riding Hood strolled down a forest path to her grandmother's house, she witnessed a giant-ass wolf eating a bunch of people, and she said, "Oh, shit, here we go again." And then she stabbed the wolf a bunch of times with a pitchfork. That's right, folks. It's time for another Final Girl review. This one, The Big Bad Wolf in the Storybook Woods.
How'd it go? I think I biffed it. I couldn't get the slobber quite right. It was too watery. I needed more phlegm, so.
I'm sure you nailed it.
No slobber. It's fine. It's whatever. I'm in talks, at least, for this Geico commercial if this thing falls through, so.
That's huge, man. I hope you get it.
What are you, a wolf?
Yeah.
Lore-wise, we're in familiar territory here, right? It's a land of fable and whimsy, with gingerbread houses, meadows, and dells, but with a dark presence descending on the idyllic landscape. The Big Bad Wolf, bane of little piggies and granddaughters everywhere, equipped with big eyes, big teeth, and big dreams of fairy tale slaughter. But before we dive deep into that canine's flea-ridden, matted fur, let's examine our location. The Storybook Woods are a unique setting for a Final Girl game, so unique that the rulebook even mentions it. There are fewer spaces here than your average Final Girl map, and the connections make for some mighty tricky positioning. These spots here are bridges that cross the river. Usually, you can take 2 victims with you from one space to another when you're trying to bring them to safety. When you're crossing bridges, though, only 1 victim can follow you. All you seasoned Final Girlers out there are already oohing and eyeing, I know, but there are also quite a few items and events that will modify this location even more on a per-game basis. You might find a raft that lets you travel up and down the river at a cost of time, maybe a secret passageway between the meadow and the dell, or even a toll bridge that you can place anywhere you want along the river. And speaking of items, the Storybook Woods have some great ones. Tangling vines that you can put out to stop the killer in their tracks, songbirds that you can send to peck the killer's eyes out, and Red's cloak, which will trick the killer into targeting you instead of victims. All in all, this location is kind of a knockout for me. I love the theming, I love the tricky, weird positioning of it, and figuring out ways to slow up the killer using the paths is super satisfying. But what about that aforementioned killer? Well, every fairy tale needs a villain, and what better villain than the Big Bad Wolf? The main uniqueness for this fellow is his 2 modes, track and slay. There's probably a joke here about track and field, but I don't really feel like finding it, so we're just gonna move on. He starts the game in tracking mode, where he can zip around the board with a movement speed of 3 to track, get it, down victims. After his bloodlust rises a bit through the help of terror cards, he will switch into slay mode, where he will move more rarely, but he will attack very hard, carving through victims and your health if anything is unlucky enough to stand in his space. Okay, so that's a cool idea, but in my experience, he's only ever in tracking mode for, at most, the first 3 rounds, and then he just slays Yas Queen for the rest of the game. Which means he stands around during the killer phase and then will occasionally move due to terror cards that will pop up and direct him in random ways. Now, this does make his movement unpredictable, but just unpredictable in kind of an unfun way to play against. A lot of killer phases went by without the Big Bad Wolf being that big or that bad, punctuated by a few, very few killer phases that were, like, really rough. This just comes down to personal preference, but my personal preference is for the Final Girl killer's turns to be consistently rough, punctuated by turns that are so rough that you cannot believe you were that unlucky. The Big Bad Wolf had a lot of moments where you would look at the board and you would say, okay, so I guess we're just skipping the killer phase, and then you draw a terror card and it says, he moves to the grandmother's house, and there's also no one at the grandmother's house, so you go, all right, you're at grandma's house now, have fun there, bud. Once he's gone through all of the terror cards and his ultimate ability is revealed, it's just kind of what we've come to expect from Final Girl killers at this point, where he moves to the closest thing and then attacks. In the end, he does have that consistently problematic factor that I like, but he loses his unpredictable nature. And I get that this happens with most Final Girl killers when their ultimate unlocks, but like, come on, he's a wild animal. Shouldn't he be more unpredictable in his final form? And let's talk for a second about the whole track and slay thing to begin with. A lot of the time, you hear about a Final Girl killer's mechanism and you go, ugh, that is perfect. Like the evil morph evolving as the game goes on, or Dr. Flight slipping into the dream world. This might be kind of nitpicky, but track and slay doesn't feel super evocative of the big bad wolf mythos for me. I feel like in most fairy tales, he's painted more as a cunning trickster than some methodical hunter. There is a tarot card that references him dressing up as Red's grandma, and I don't know, maybe that would have been an interesting way to go with this baddie. Like he's switching between grandma and wolf mode, and maybe victims will follow you into his space when he's the grandma, but you can't attack him. Or, I don't know, like maybe he regains health as the grandma, but he can't attack you. I don't know. I'm not a Final Girl designer. All I can say for sure is that the track and slay modes didn't feel super big bad wolfy to me, and they also didn't add a fun enough wrinkle to the game for me to happily ignore that thematic disconnect. So with all of that considered, where does this one fall for me? Well, I love the Storybook Woods. Like, they are a standout location. I have a lot of fun there. Big Bad Wolf, bit disappointing, not a huge fan. I think both of those things factored in, it's a 6.5. I still had a lot of fun. Every game did still come down to the wire, which is exactly what you want. Big Bad Wolf knocks it down a little bit for me, but I will gladly return to the Storybook Woods over and over again with other killers and with other Final Girls.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon. Well, how was it? How'd you do?
They were hoping you were still out here. They've got some good news for you.
Oh, no.
What?
That was the Geico, I got it.
Well, you can't do both?
No, they're both shooting on Saturday. Listen, just thank you for the opportunity. Just give it to the runner-up, okay?